teaching went through an approved program that was delivered as they were teaching. So it enabled us, and I guess I just have a question, is it out of the realm of possibility to consider these adjunct positions in the same vein as we consider workplace specialists? So that a principal who would want to bring in a content specialist, I'll use Mark as an example, could hire Mark to come in, teach biology, and Ball State could have a workplace specialist program for content majors that they go through, much like career and tech ed. I don't think we devalue career and technical education children because we have this different pathway for certifying the professionals. Is that a possibility to do that?
It's similar. It's a similar concept as our workplace specialist licenses, but one of the big distinctions here is that it would require the bachelor's degree, which is appropriate in an area like biology, whereas with our workplace specialist licenses, they don't require a bachelor's degree, but rather look at areas in which you've worked. So if, say, a fire science teacher, you would look at how many years that person has been serving on a fire department. And so, but yeah, they're very comparable in the sense that you're looking at what individuals have done.
My question, Michelle, though, is once we, based on the baseline requirement, either it was a certification as a welder in the career tech ed field or a content area major in secondary ed, is it reasonable to think that we wouldn't be consistent with career and tech ed and our content area specialists and enable them to get a certification like a workplace specialist does as they teach? Can that be considered in the rule?
Oh, so required like the pedagogy, the way that the
That's yes.
Yes, we certainly could write that in. Yeah, it would be almost like a T-to-T program, but I mean it would be different in nature.
But unlike a T-to-T program, again, I don't want to put words in Mark's mouth, but unlike a T-to-T program where Mark wasn't necessarily allowed to teach, again, our career and tech ed folks are teaching while they're learning how to teach. That's going on
at the same time in sync.
Could that be considered in this rule? I think that's what I'm hearing Neil ask.
That is true. T-to-T.
Tell me how that connects to limited license and emergency permits now. If we have someone that has a biology degree and we can't find a biology teacher, but they've got they've been in biology, they have a biology degree, they've got a bachelor's degree, and I can't find a biology teacher, can I bring them and get them an emergency permit?
Yes.
Okay, so the answer, so what I'm saying is that's already out there. See, without this rule, that's already out there. I can go get them. Now, let me go another step then. So we already have the ability to bring them in on an emergency permit. For them to maintain their emergency permit, what do they need to do?
They need to be taking coursework toward meeting certification requirements to get a license. And they need to be taking at least 2 courses a year while they're teaching in order to continue to renew that emergency
which
permit.
Which could be part of the pedagogy of learning how to teach.
Will be eventually.
Okay,
Yes.
so what I'm saying is, that's already here. Without this rule, that's here.
The 2 courses is?
No, I'm just saying to get someone into the classroom
I know, but
with a biology major like this gentleman. I can already bring him into my building under an emergency permit without this rule.
Nothing necessarily wrong with having multiple options or multiple ways to
Okay,
get into the classroom.
and Neil, I appreciate that, but to say that this is going to open a door that's not already there, let's not pretend that, because the door's already there.
I like the idea of many doors, personally. But at the same time, I do also understand and appreciate the concern about the fact that just having content knowledge is not just having pedagogical knowledge is not also any guarantee that the person can teach, because there are plenty of teachers who go through schools of education who don't turn out to be very good. There are lots of them who turn out to be wonderful teachers.
Well, let's not use the word plenty. I don't like that. How about some? How about
some? My point is just that my point in making that comment was only that I think that some way of assuring that folks who want to teach and who do have the content knowledge are also being exposed to the pedagogy, to the classroom management, to the kinds of things you have to do to be an effective teacher, which is a skill that you learn most by doing and by learning from other very high quality teachers and watching and imitating and getting that experience. The woman who said she's not the same teacher this year as she was 20 years ago, of course, you learn by experience. The question is what we do to let them in the door, and I'm looking for a way to find a compromise. I like the idea of many doors, but I do understand the need for some kind of connection to pedagogy. And I think Tony's idea of the kind of analogous idea of this workplace specialist is an interesting one. And
I appreciate what you're saying. I think we're closer to agreeing than we probably sound to be. But when I think about this, first of all, I go, what are we even in this for? And I'm one of these Stephen Covey guys, and I say, what's the end in mind? And I think Dan, and I appreciate what Dan said, or if he said it or implied it. We want to get the best teachers possible in front of our students. That's what we want. And whether I'm a superintendent or a parent or a person beside me, I want the best person possible in front of my students. And part of that is that they have a strong content knowledge. We know that. Let's get it. And I've heard too many broad picture things. Is number one that some maybe if you, and what broad content knowledge do we need to teach Biology 9? I don't know that as far as, but the guy who's a biology major probably has a larger content than a teacher teaching Biology 9, but he might have plenty of information to teach Biology 9. But who's the better teacher? We could argue that. So I think we want that the end in mind is, and I appreciate everyone's interest in here. I don't think anyone would argue that we want to get the best people possible in front of our kids. That we do have that.
If the adjunct permit provision is approved, could a local school board still adopt a policy saying we're not going to hire teachers with just adjunct permits?
Absolutely. We have school districts now who have established a policy that they will not hire teachers on emergency permits.
So no one has to participate.
No one does.
Let me continue with my thoughts here, and then I'll try to be quiet. How's that? I thought I've done a good job of that today. How's that? Yeah. So, yeah, but anyhow, I think that I have some concerns that I don't like. That I like the concepts of REPA 2 being presented to us. I think there's way too much bureaucracy in the transition to teaching programs that are out there to stop people that are good to get into our whole program. And how do we get around those type of things? And I appreciate that. Again, as I said, I'm a Covey guy, and I like to think about in his book that he wrote several years ago, it's called The Eighth Habit. There was an emphasis on the third alternative. And there's always a third alternative. We have REPA 2, we don't have REPA 2. But the reality is he's saying there's always a third alternative if we'll step back from protecting our group and look at that third alternative. And so I'm asking us to say, what is that third alternative? And so I have this, and I'm challenging several things. What changes can we make to our present licensings offered to students to major in a teaching certificate? If we need to raise the content knowledge in people chasing teaching certificates, then let's do that. Let's readjust the time quality of methods classes, maybe at the university level. When I was, a long time ago, I had to take a methods class in social studies. I had to take a methods class in science. I had to take a methods class in math. You know what? They all sounded and looked the same, and they all smelled the same. But they cost me 3 hours of class every time. How do we adjust that and get more time into the content? And so I'm saying these, and so one of my friends told me a quote about a week ago that I like. If you want to go fast, go alone. So if this board wants to go fast, let's go by ourselves. If you want to go far, let's go with others. And so, how do we do that? But you know, I got to be careful out there. I'm not against all of this REPA 2, and I want people to know that out loud. But here's what I'm saying. I'm afraid of adopting this today. For one reason, I don't have a final draft in front of me. I'd like to have a final draft in front of me. Because we're saying, let's do this, let's make this adjustment, let's make this adjustment. I don't know what I'd like to see the final product before I buy it. And you know, and the last thing I want to say is this board, and Carrie, and we're all out there. I want you guys to come to some realization. And this just isn't coming from me. As a matter of fact, I'm taking a privilege here, and I did get to meet with Governor Pence before the election, and he talked to a group of superintendents. There were 2 comments that came out of his conversations with him. He did a nice job. First one came up from his wife, who acknowledged this, and I didn't even ask it. The morale in education right now is as low as it's ever been. Now, guys, that's the truth. Let's acknowledge that. How we address it is another thing. And the thing that, you know, and I hope Governor Pence allows me to make the, you know, maybe I hope that I'm not misquoting him too much. He says we've had a lot of reform. Let's slow down on some reform and let's get to results. And I appreciated his comment on that. Again, I want to summarize in this. Am I against the work of REPA 2? I admire what you guys have done in those type of things. I'm not comfortable with everything. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to make a motion that we not adopt REPA 2 now, that we come back with the final version for this group to evaluate and go from there.
Well, point of order, there's already a motion on the floor.
I don't think there is.
Yeah, there was.
There's no motion on the floor. Not on this.
Well, then I'd like to interfere with that motion so I have a voice and make a comment that I prepared.
Was there a second?
It's a 2-minute.
Let's see if there's a second.
Okay.
We have a second for Mike's motion.
I don't want a second until I hear Joe.
I don't think everybody's had a voice in the conversation.
There's no second. Is there
There's
a
no second.
There's no second of the motion. So we're back to discussion.
We're back to discussion.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
It'll be 2 minutes because I
Sure.
prepared it. Every 26 seconds, we lose a child, and we're losing sight of that. We're concentrating too much here on the teachers and the well-being of the institution, including us. I can understand why teaching universities are reluctant to see these changes, along with teachers who have gone through these teaching processes. They have invested a lot of time and energy to become licensed teachers. But much like many professions who will be coming to our system to teach under the new term of REPA 2, we have to realize every day the content changes. So to talk about content is, with technology, every day it changes. Troops to Teachers is one example of how this has been done successfully. This board was involved with REPA 1, which is 3 years ago. I personally met with many of those participants, and they support REPA 2. I support REPA 2 because it's followed an honorable hearing process, executive making process, with first hearing REPA 1. That was 3 years ago. REPA 2 hearings were in June. Since June from today, we've not heard as much as we've heard since the election. So if that isn't political and not about kids, I don't know what is. Many of the teacher complaints, honor me, I honored you. Many of the teacher complaints have been made and changed to reflect personal interest. Those changes made in response to public input have been honored with integrity, and I appreciate that the current superintendent has done so. Removing language around teacher data for evaluation purposes. Teachers will remain in their content areas and cannot have special needs with only a test, cannot become a special needs teacher. Per the rules of educator preparation and the rationale, the changes that have been made include updating and aligning definitions to state law, consolidating rules, eliminating duplication licensure areas, using REPA 2 rules to align with Common Core standards and complements REPA 1. I'm personally pleased to see that virtual instruction will require master pedagogy and a test will be identified for that. And I think every teacher should be looking at mastering some pedagogy in virtual instruction. Builds on the need to expand dual crediting, allows principals for schools to identify quality teachers and make their local decisions on hiring. That's been a big deal. With the constant rotation of superintendents within schools, adjunct principals or adjunct leaders could be helpful for continuity purposes. I see it a lot, especially every 4 years you see a rotation of leadership. Moving forward will provide great opportunities for the new superintendent to build on these strengths. Determining the examination. I mean, how many of us in this room are real happy with Praxis and what it's provided in terms of quality? Review and consider the impact that substitutes have on real student learning. We need to look at that. Will assist in providing school corporations greater ability to grow their own administrators and work with public-private entities around professional development. These are really areas that we need to focus on, and I think Dr. Ritz can do that. So this idea that we need to slow down is just ridiculous. We're slowing down for the institution, not for the kids, and that's just not right. All that said, I'm saddened that much of the concentration on these requests are about this election and not about the kids. Dr. Bennett has laid the foundation for us to move forward in providing qualified, highly qualified teachers. And I want to commend you, Dr. Bennett, for this work because we started out with a D in NCTQ and we are a borderline B. And hopefully through these efforts we'll be an A. I thank you very much for your time and your respect.
REPA 2, the way I see it, just provides greater options and flexibility only for the school systems that want to participate with it.
That's right.
So, I mean, if you have school districts out there that want to experiment with their hiring standards and take advantage of some of the new provisions in REPA 2, then they will. But the ones that don't have to, right?
That's correct.
So, I'm really missing part of the contention here because no one's being forced to do anything. If you want to keep your standards, not hire adjunct permit teachers, then fine. These ultimately are local decisions that should be resolved at the local level. This just gives some flexibility and opportunity to those that want to participate. All the rest of the school districts that don't.
I have one question, Mike. You made some good points. Are there particular issues or modifications, if we were to pass this, that you think are, I'm asking a question I don't know the answer to, so I might not like your answer, but are there some areas, where you think, instead of delaying the whole body of work that we've worked on for quite some months, are there some particular issues that are most neuralgic or disconcerting that you think we should adjust? What would you suggest if we were to move forward that would make this more enthusiastic? We would create more receptivity of the change and the move forward.
I think a major concern I have, Dan, number one, is the amount of folks out there who could all of a sudden become part of the licensing group. I don't like that idea. I still think there needs to be a gatekeeper on who gets into this program. And I like the concept that Marian University is a gatekeeper. And the idea that they need to come through there. And when I start thinking about ripple effects and I start thinking about who's out there and where are these folks going to be coming from and what are they going to be coming to us with, that bothers me. Because I really don't feel like we have much control over that. and and I listened to the concept of the board having to approving that concept, but that's still one of those things that haunts me. The concept of and I still believe that there needs to be some fundamental expectations of all people coming into the field of education, and someone referred to it as a science, and I think that's true. And there needs to be some fundamental expectations of some child psychology. There needs to be some fundamentals of child development in those type of situations, and a fundamentals of teaching, and we talk about that. And as I sat around and we thought about that, I think let's go to Broad Ripple and what an impact we've made. But those people have gone in there, and if you follow what they're doing a little bit, they're talking about good lesson plans.
Processes, procedures.
Discipline. That's right. I want some of our folks coming in with some of those, understanding that they're going to develop their coming. But I think that's a fair expectation.
So is your biggest concern with the adjunct?
Yeah, I just feel like. Yeah, go ahead.
I have concerns, and I can say philosophically, I believe in competition. It makes us all better. I can believe in evaluations. It makes me a better teacher. I'm going through it this week. My concerns aren't political, election. My concerns have been the concerns I've had while I've been looking at it, for as long as I've been looking at it. I look at even the principal licensure with the 2 years teaching experience. He or she is going to be evaluating me 5 times a year on a pretty stringent scale, which I appreciate because it makes me a better teacher. But with 2 years of teaching experience, that's not a lot of experience for somebody to come in and be good at what they're supposed to be good at to evaluate a building full of teachers. Now, do they have the choice to hire that person as principal? Yes, but it's still a concern. And, that's the lens that I'm in that I can view it from.
Piggybacking off of that, I think, given the rationale behind eliminating the elementary as a content and the special education as a content, I would personally group the high ability and the ENL in that same subcategory, given the broadband exposure.
Well, can I make a motion that may kind of help us? Mm-hmm. I know we do have other things. I know this is very important, so we can't rush it. But on the other hand, we have other things to get to. So the motion I would suggest is that we approve Repa 2 with 2 changes. First is that there be a pedagogy component to the adjunct license that's comparable to the workplace specialist license or requirement for voc and technical ed. And secondly, that English as a second language be added to the list of categories that are not that are exempt from. However you say that, English as a second language, you can't just take a test. You have to demonstrate training or.
Would you be open to a friendly amendment from Sarah to add?
I know, Sarah. The only thing is I'm not as persuaded that, especially because you can't teach elementary without pedagogy training, and high ability in the high school and stuff is all about content. I'm not as worried about pedagogy with high ability. Those are kids where the content is. I'm not quite as persuaded that there's specials that you couldn't get a good teacher who could pass and demonstrate strong content experience. And with my amendment about requiring some pedagogical connection, that would be enough to teach high ability, who are smart anyway. I mean, I've got kids who are in both categories myself, and so I don't know what you think about that. But so if you want to add high ability, I guess I'd be okay with that. I'm trying to keep also the number of exemptions to a limit. But if you feel strong, you're in a classroom, you know better than I do.
And I respect wanting to limit that. I just feel like it's an overlooked component.
All right, so
high ability.
All right, so let's add. Let's add
ability or high ability everywhere.
Pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so let's add. All right, so I'll accept the amendment. So my proposal again, my motion is that we approve Repa 2 with 2 changes. That we add a pedagogy requirement to the adjunct license connected to or similar to the workplace specialist, and that we move 2 categories, English as a second language and high ability license, to the exempt category that are not subject to, you can't get a license just by taking a test.
Second.
Marisa, can we have a motion in a second, but Marisa, I want you to respond to the adjunct issue.
There's statutory language about our requirement to test teachers in content areas. And as of next year, fall of 2013, there will also be a pedagogy exam required for all individuals who are seeking a regular teaching license. And that would be required for anyone completing a transition to teaching program or whatever. Perhaps if the purpose of the adjunct permit is to open up access to teaching for the very first time to get into the profession for an adjunct permit, perhaps someone who has been successful on that 5-year adjunct permit and has had good evaluations, maybe before they renew, they might have to pass the pedagogy exam that everyone else is going to be required to take too. That might be a way to fit in some kind of a requirement that they have demonstrated a mastery in pedagogy before they go forward. If they are able to do that, we've already provided the adjunct permit as a way to get into the profession. If they can pass the pedagogy exam and they've had good evaluations, which is 3 out of 5, perhaps then they could move into the stream of regular licensure so that as they renew every 5 years, they would be completing professional development.
Well, that's fine, but that doesn't change my concern about initially getting the adjunct license. I don't think you should be able to get an adjunct
And at what
license
point would
without.
that pedagogy exam be taken? Are you talking that it would be taken prior to entering the classroom, or it could be taken as much as 5 years later? I think that would be my concern is...
Well, I think for someone who has only a content major and has never had any pedagogy who gets an adjunct permit or wants to obtain an adjunct permit, I'm not sure that they would have any background in pedagogy to be able to pass that test if you required it up front to get the permit. But
Well, that's our point, though.
okay, you
that's
want
our
that
point.
up front. You want it up front.
I think there is a way we can tie the adjunct to a workplace specialist format.
So
Right, but the pedagogy would not necessarily happen before we
It would
issue
happen
the
during.
permit, but it would happen during.
Yes,
Okay.
much like workplace specialist.
Okay.
So let me see if I have the motion in the second correct. Your motion is to pass, or is for REPA 2, excluding the English language learners and high ability, and to require for just a description, a workplace specialist program during the period that an adjunct teacher is teaching.
Correct.
Is that correct? And then I think we have a second to that motion.
During that first 5
So
years.
comment on or questions about the motion. Further discussion.
Any further discussion?
I'd still like to see a final draft before I vote yes.
So we have a motion and a second. So we have a motion and a second, so we are going to move to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
So we have 2 nays. So motion carries 9-2. All right. B, approval of the proposed language for the reading rule. Anna Schultz and John Wolf. As Anna and John take their, because of what our time, what we are going to do, we had a spotlight on learning, which thankfully came out of out of close proximity today, the State Charter School Board. We will bring that back in January. That will be the spotlight on learning in January. So we will forego that today. Anna and John, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Ready? Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good morning, right? Good morning. It is always our pleasure to be here today and have conversations with you about the Department of Education State Board's initiative pertaining to reading. Our conversations today stem from the memo that you have all received. As you are aware, this is a continuation of a conversation that began mid-June, beginning in June. The purpose of today's conversation or discussion is simply to make sure that the rule aligns with statutory language, and the memo goes through and explains that. We also took the opportunity to provide some clarification to some of the terms in here. For example, further defining an elementary school to include a school with a section of grade 3. We also looked at the clarification whenever it talked about individual learning plans as well as individual education plans.
Any questions for John? Anna?
I've got some notes here. Let me see if I can organize myself a little bit.
And just to clarify, this is the proposed language that would be published in public hearing. Public comment would come after this. We're still in the very first stages of this.
We're not adopting a rule, we're just proposing.
Right. Now, this is the language that includes the charter association.
Yes.
There's a motion to approve, and I'll second it, and then
Then we'll
Mike's
go to
going to
Mike for
comment.
comment.
Is that okay, Mike?
And it still says in here, you know, my notes are that a reading plan for a charter school may be collected, but that's a statute that says they do not have to give it to
That
us.
is in statute.
Which you and I both agree. We disagree with the statute.
You and I agree with that. You and I agree about that.
Thanks.
That is the appropriate way to say it.
You
We
agree to
about
disagree with that.
No, we agree. We both agree on that. That's good, isn't it, Tony?
But we don't have the ability to act on your
No.
agreement.
No, that's too bad.
We don't have the ability to act in their agreement to disagree with the act.
The other thing on this one is a question that has been brought up. When it gets down to when are we determining whether a school has 90% pass rate? First test?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Can't we do anything about that?
That would be something that when we go to hearing, that could be an option that, could be brought up.
That's in our purview.
Okay, because
The answer to that, Mike, is yes. You can do that.
Yeah,
You
because
can take
I-
a look at remediated pass rates.
right, because I think that needs to be addressed, and so again, am I in favor of the rule? And no, but so I'm not going to stop it from going to rulemaking process.
Sure. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. Approval of final language for summer school reimbursement.
Michelle's going to
Michelle?
talk to you about that.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks, John.
Zach Foudy came and had proposed language last July, I guess August 1st meeting, it was sent in July, where we were changing the reimbursement process or funding process for summer school, and we switched from a reimbursement program to a per pupil funding. We held the public hearing, and we had two individuals come, and they had shared public testimony. We are recommending one change to the rule for final language, which would cap the number of students that a school could receive reimbursement for. And this is just to cap the maximum amount of funding. But it would still be per pupil funding.
Do we have a motion?
It says the state board may set a cap on the number of students who can be assigned to a single course and teachers, but we do not have a number.
No, you would be able to determine what that maximum cap would be. So if you wanted to say, we don't want 300 students enrolled in one course, and instead we're going to cap that at 100. I mean, I'm just throwing out numbers here, but you would be able to determine what the appropriate cap would be.
We're giving ourselves the regulatory authority to put a number on a summer school course if we wanted to.
Yes, and it's a may, not a shall, so you're just getting the discretion to do that if you wanted to utilize that authority.
Okay.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? D, approval notice of teacher tests cut scores.
Jeffrey here?
He's not, he should be making his way. There he is.
Here he is.
Who's the next one? Who's he?
Will.
Is he here?
He's here. You might make the announcement so we can hear you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dr. Bennett and members of the board. We're here today to actually recommend the adoption of cut scores for the core academic skills. Apologize, back up. I haven't met the board yet. I'm Jeff Botteron, Director of Educator Effectiveness and Leadership, and this is Nancy. Nancy is the with Evaluation Systems Group, and she is the co-director of the Indiana Core Assessments for Educator Licensure with Pearson, and she'll be working with us today. Today we're here to present to you we're here to recommend the adoption of the Core Academic Skills Assessment and the cut scores associated with it, as well as make a recommendation for the adoption of cut scores for the elementary education licensure exam. The Office of Educator Effectiveness and Leadership is excited to introduce the Core Academic Skills Assessment. Basically, this test is designed to measure the knowledge and skills related to reading, writing, and mathematics that are needed to perform effectively in Indiana educator preparation programs. At this point, I'd like to again just introduce Nancy to provide you an overview of where we're at and what we've done to date, and then I'll come back to talk a little bit more about the recommended cut scores for both the Core Academic Skills Assessment and for the elementary education licensing exam through Praxis 2 currently.
Good morning. Thanks, Jeff. Pearson's delighted to be working with the state of Indiana and Indiana educators to develop the Indiana Core Assessments for Educator Licensure program. The Core Academic Skills Assessment is the first assessment that we're bringing before the board. And as Jeff described, it is a test of basic skills that will replace Praxis 1. It will be one option by which educators can satisfy, or prospective teachers can satisfy, entrance requirements to Indiana educator preparation programs. It is designed to be a subtest model, and there are 3 subtests to the Core Academic Skills Assessment. We call it CASA, by the way, shorthand. One subtest looks at reading, another subtest looks at mathematics, and the last subtest looks at writing. Candidates will be required to pass each subtest in order to meet the requirement for entrance to the educator preparation program. I've been asked to provide a brief overview of the development process used to prepare the test. And what I'd like to say is that we use industry-accepted standards to develop the materials to ensure that the products we provide are reliable and valid. The first step in the development process involved defining the test content. And at the request of the department, we prepared standards for CASA that are aligned with the Indiana Student Academic Standards. The CASA standards were reviewed by Indiana educators and approved by the department. Following standards approval, we then took them and organized them into an assessment blueprint that allowed us to develop the test and also prepare for score reporting. The assessment blueprint was reviewed and approved by the department. Once we had the approved blueprint, we developed test items that were matched to the objectives including in the CASA. Once item development was complete, approximately 24 Indiana teachers and teacher educators reviewed CASA test items, and this took place at a meeting that was held last April. One group, the Bias Review Committee, reviewed the items solely for fairness and diversity issues, and a Content Advisory Committee reviewed the items for content accuracy and appropriateness. In addition, the Content Advisory Committee was required to address any fairness and diversity issues raised by the Bias Review Committee. We revised the test items based on committee recommendations. And in addition, we collected item validation ratings from Indiana educators who were on the Content Advisory Committee. And in their item validation ratings, an item was rated valid if it matched the test objective to which it was written, if it was accurate, free from bias, and job-related. Once the CASA test items were revised, we conducted a pilot test with over 700 students enrolled in Indiana institutions of higher education. The robust participation of the Indiana students allowed us to examine the psychometric properties of the test items. Following the pilot test, we reconvened members from the CASA Content Advisory Committees to review pilot test responses to the writing assignment. This step was undertaken so that we could establish Indiana markers for each point on the score scale for the writing assignment, so that these marker responses can be used to train scores once the test is operational. The final step in the CASA test development process was to conduct a standard setting meeting. Following pilot testing, we prepared an operational test form for each of the CASA subtests. CASA standard setting took place on November 16th, and a modified Angoff procedure that's widely used in the profession was used to gather standard setting recommendations from Indiana educators. As part of this process, Indiana educators reviewed each test form and provided individual item judgments about the performance of candidates who have the level of knowledge and skills needed to perform effectively in an Indiana educator preparation program. Prior to making their standard setting judgments, panel members discussed the knowledge and skills required to perform effectively in an Indiana educator preparation program. They practiced making standard setting judgments and were given an opportunity to ask questions about the process. We provided the results of the standard setting process to the department, and that information will be used to make a recommendation for your consideration to set the passing standards for each CASA subtest. As you can see, Indiana educators have been involved throughout the development of the CASA. They participated in defining what would be assessed on each subtest. They approved each test item and revised test items as well, and they made recommendations for you to consider when setting the passing score. Again, we're very excited to be working with you on this program and look forward to continuing that work.
Let me ask, I understand to get into a teacher's program, correct?
Yes.
So they would have to pass this before they could get into a teacher program at the different universities? Correct.
It's one means. There are other assessments that have been approved by the state. CASA will just be one means to.
So we're going to tell Marion University which kids you can let into the education program and which kids you can't.
Yes, there are some alternative avenues, but on the other side, you would hate to have someone pay tuition, go through all the steps, and get to the end and find out there's some content deficiency around basic English skills,
right.
And we wouldn't. And on the education profession, you have to have certain of those skills. So we welcome this kind of thing to instruct, typically young people. Sometimes adults come in early on that this won't be a profession where you'll be able to go.
I guess I'd have a hard. Dan, I trust Marion University. I can't believe that you'd want us telling you what tests they need to take.
Frankly, as higher ed, it's if you're able to pass English and the various courses in the liberal arts core and can't pass that test, it's it isn't the best. So we should.
Isn't it like the SAT in a sense?
But you know what? I don't tell him. You don't have to have the SAT to get into a variety of universities.
If I could interject just real quick, we do currently have the Praxis 1 established as a similar benchmark. The CASA is simply replacing
it's already in place.
So
this is a better test. The students have to pass Praxis now to get into professional education.
But we're setting cut scores, if I understand.
We're setting cut scores, and I'm getting the impression we have a better instrument here.
Sure. So we believe that this revised instrument is going to give us a better gauge about the level of the candidate's ability to really be successful in the preparation program. And that's why, again, so we've been very, very happy to partner with Pearson in the development of this test. And it's been thoroughly reviewed by Indiana educators throughout the process, from item development to standard setting. Both those that are involved in higher education and K through 12 teachers have reviewed the items, approved the items for use on the test, and then also ultimately recommended a cut score for the for the department to consider, and then we'll provide our recommendations here shortly.
When the first practice requirement came into the field, was it in the last 10, 11?
You'll have to excuse me on
It was under the standard board almost 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
My only question, I guess I'll direct it to Dan, is are you comfortable this is rigorous enough and not too rigorous, or whatever the standard is, so you get the kind of flow you want? Because Mike raises a good point.
In a perfect world, like I said, if you're able to pass college level, you shouldn't have to take a praxis test. But over the years, Standard Board and other have indicated we needed to because there was evidence. And so it does bring focus to these basic skills. And if a student's off in an area, maybe from background or something, we can take care of it early on. So I don't think we can go away from it, unfortunately.
You're okay with the cut scores?
And I appreciate, especially when you look at the involvement we've had, and we could ask the field what they think of the involvement, but I think it's been thorough.
We'll ask you to make the motion then.
I'll make it. I'll move we adopt it.
We have a motion. We have a second. We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion?
Under the direction of Dan Ellsmer, I'll vote yes.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? I didn't hear you, Mike.
I said yes ahead.
Okay.
Well, I was going to play around and vote and change my vote and see if Mike would chase me. But we're in.
Let's go to E, approval. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Approval of new percentage points and target percentages. That's Will Krebs.
And we provided a handout this morning. You have it. You'll see it's got, I think it starts out high school model at the top. It's got some percentage points, and Will's going to explain that in a little more detail.
Good morning.
Good morning, Will.
Barely still morning, but good morning. Thank you all for the opportunity to come speak. This process is in the rule. It requires that every year the values that trigger the receipt of a target in the 8F model be revised based on the data that we observe. What you have in front of you is the target that was used in the 2011-2012 grade and the new target that would be used for the 12-13 grade. In order to establish these targets, we look at the past 3 years of data, and for each year, we identify the rate that separates the top quartile of schools from the bottom 3 quartile of schools, identify those 3 rates, average them, and that average becomes the target. That's the first. The second is to satisfy the requirement that every year the college and career ready weight increases by at least 5% in the overall weighting scheme for the high school model. It also asks that the ELA and math proficiency rates decrease accordingly so it doesn't go over 100% or 1.00. This year the increase is 5%, and then the ELA proficiency rate and the math proficiency rate each decrease by 2.5% to accommodate the change.
This is just math. Human judgment.
Correct.
We have a motion.
Move approved.
So moved. Second. We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Tony, excuse me, who made the motion?
David.
Thank you.
And then Tony.
Got that.
Move to the consent agenda. We have 3 items on the consent agenda. Adams Central Governing Board Selection Plan.
Again, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
That's just to make them compliant with the statute on election times.
That you say we have to do, Julie says I don't have to do, but we said we'll
right.
Back, we might
That's
as well
correct.
Yes.
That's correct. The second thing is the approval of the
telling you what to do, Mike.
of the accreditation. We sent you a spreadsheet listing everyone's recommended accreditation status. There has been one change to that I would ask you to note. It's that East Noble Middle School should be full accreditation. And so I would ask that you include that in your vote here. The other is the corrected grade designations. There were 4 schools in the spreadsheet that you actually approved previously that had the wrong grade. The schools actually got their correct grade, but what you approved was an incorrect grade. We're asking that you approve the corrected grade through part of your consent agenda.
We have a motion for the consent agenda. We have a motion by BJ.
Second.
We have a second. Any further
Should I vote on this or not?
Why don't you, Mike?
You can abstain. I think it would be okay.
Okay. It's up
All-
to whatever you tell me to do, Becky.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And then Mike has an abstention. Becky, I know one of our turnaround operators has an out-of-town guest that came with them that has to catch a flight.
Okay.
Could we consider moving them up, the turnaround update up to first?
Sure.
And let Charter Schools USA go?
We need Jim to get here from his office. So, Jim, if you're watching this, we need you. Here he is.
I also only hang for a couple. I think I told you guys in advance I have an
Yes.
appointment so I'll listen for a couple of minutes. But I apologize to my colleagues. I have to leave.
We're
early.
finished with the action.
Right.
We are.
Thanks. Go ahead, Jim.
We are at, today we'll just do the update as we did last month. You were sent in advance, forgive me, updates around where the turnaround school operators are with data and the lead partners. Next month we'll talk in much more detail around particularly the progress to date at John Marshall Community High School. The board's recommendation in August or September, one of those months, we had set up mid-year, goals, both qualitative and quantitative. And so we'll be doing a qualitative review of the school's progress using the Mass Inside High Performing High Poverty Schools framework later this month. And the data is already starting to come in around some of those ECA goals that we set. And the district is kind enough to share that first one of the data points at one grade level. They already feel is on the right track, and we look forward to getting more data like that. And we'll be sharing that with the board at the January 2nd meeting. We'll also be doing mid-year reviews of our Turnaround Academy's progress later this month and early in January as well. So that's where we are to date. As you imagine, the Turnaround Academies, we have students right now taking, and of course, assessments at the high school level. It's a really important time as we enter into truly a new phase of the work as we start to see what the first semester of instruction has been able to offer those students in terms of an opportunity to either pass that test for the first time as first-time test takers or pass it as retesters. And so we look forward to looking at that data as well. I want to open it up for questions, and we also, as Dr. Bennett has mentioned, we have representatives from all 3 turnaround school operators with us here somewhere in the room as well.
Anecdotally, I hear decorum, culture, environment is moving forward nicely. What's your informal assessment? And
I think that's it's an informal assessment I would agree with. I think that in all of our schools, all of them have areas as it pertains to culture they want to continue to tighten up. There's some substantive improvement in many of the schools. As we talked about from the beginning, there's one school that I think has got off to a start, unlike the other 4, that being Howell, that continues to be working to catch up, and substantive efforts been made to do that as well. But I think that that's a fair assessment, Dan, overall.
There was a very nice story in the Star about Emma Dunn, and it was very good to read, very encouraging.
Pat, you want to go ahead and have Charter Schools USA, because I know they have been out of town.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Bennett.
Hello, Board. John H., the CEO of Charter Schools USA. Thank you today. I just would like to introduce Jeannie Allen from the Center for Education Reform here from Washington, D.C., and she has visited all 3 of the academies within the last 2 days. I thought it might be helpful to get a outside view of some of her assessment that she's seen, and she's also met with school leaders and with students, and I'd like to introduce Jeannie Allen.
Thank you, John. Thank you, members of the board, for having me and being open to hearing just a few reflections on the turnarounds. I'd actually asked the turnaround managers if I could come visit next time I was coming to Indiana and get a sense of what was happening. The Center for Education Reform for nearly 20 years has been involved in a number of restructuring and policy efforts from sort of the macro to the micro level, and from the development of charter school laws to the creation of these turnaround recovery school districts across the country. Have been very engaged in trying to make sure that we, in fact, are putting children first and ensuring that the policies you adopt actually have the net effect. Some of you may have read recently in both reports from major research institutions as well as the U.S. Department of Education, this notion of turnaround is coming under a lot of fire, a lot of scrutiny and a lot of fire. The notion of reaching out, as Secretary Duncan has at a federal level and you all on a state level have done, to really arrest failure in these schools and take them over, has lots of different people on different sides saying, are we really doing what we need to be doing? Is this resulting in intended results? And from Central Falls, Rhode Island, where I visited, to Philadelphia, to places in Nevada, the results are very mixed. So I didn't know what to expect when I walked into these schools, and frankly, I was a little surprised at how orderly they were, and that the culture did seem to have been reset, or beginning to be reset just in a few short months. I had students take me around. I spent probably the better part of the day talking to in excess of 100 students, parents, and different leaders and educators at the schools. And while it was a very, very short period of time to have any kind of real assessment other than anecdotal, the students said they're better off. They went to find other schools assuming this would be a bad thing from the publicity they'd heard, and they actually came back. The teachers said they had control. And time again, it seemed that people, as soon as they recognize a problem, were actually able to do something about it. And so from a research standpoint, the tenets and the flexibility that your law affords your turnarounds is actually very, very different than what's happening. And my conclusion initially, and based on just looking back at some of the data briefly this morning, is that those schools that are kind of under more scrutiny and those efforts that the Department of Education in Washington is really reevaluating don't afford the kind of contractual autonomy and flexibility to the contractors that you do. And so I just applaud you for recognizing that until and unless you actually take schools like this and really give managers and operators, no matter who they might be, in town, out of town, companies or local community organizations, that freedom and that high level of performance accountability, you will not you might be another one of those anecdotes in the, oh my gosh, should we be doing this? I'd also add, from a perspective of funding, I mean, this is a program that's going to be under a lot of scrutiny, obviously, with fiscal austerity measures being taken at the federal level. And there's a constant hue and cry right now among policymakers in Washington, no surprise to any of you reading the paper, about what programs really stay and what programs go. And so the results focus that you have here is much more likely to get the attention. It really doesn't have to do with who's in power or what's being done here or anywhere else. It really is a matter of, can you actually pass muster when you apply and when you continue to draw down funds to be able to pass on these schools. And some places are not going to be successful. And so I think you really do have the seeds of that. And it was just such a pleasure to be here and visit with them, and I hope to come back and do that again soon.
Thank you. Questions for Jeannie or John?
I can't help but pass up the opportunity to thank you, Mr. Superintendent, as they call you sometimes, and your staff for putting these contracts together correctly. I mean, what I hear you saying, if you are going to do these turnaround things, you better know what you're doing. You better set up the contracts, give both authority, responsibility, and accountability in equal measures, not just one or the other. So it sounds like we've set it up in the best case scenario, and I appreciate that feedback. I want to thank you and your staff.
Gene, what are some things I very much appreciate your compliments, but I would ask you, where are we missing? I mean, part of...
What more can we do?
Yeah, what more can we do? What should we be thinking about going forward in these things? I mean, you've been to places that maybe not are getting good results, but they're maybe doing good things that we aren't doing.
Right.
What are some things we should consider in the future?
Well, I would say there's probably two things that I notice more immediately. One is that There is, from what I understand, a tendency, and look, you're regulators, so I understand this, but to kind of micromanage some of the processes. So when you're asking questions and showing up or doing reviews, it should be constantly about what are the programs that are making gains and based on curricular performance, not was there a fight yesterday. So was there a fight yesterday should be met with what are you doing, tell us about the program for young ladies at Manual that's helping them find a better outlet in life, right? So I think there doesn't sound like there's as much focus from here down to the schools about the educational programs that really, some of them are really stellar. I mean, the fact that they have a program called HYPE that's trying to bring in students for credit recovery to get them back on track who have been in trouble is not something you're seeing a lot of places. So highlighting what seems to be having a lot of traction so that you can get accelerated maybe in the other schools as well as some of the traditional public schools would be great. One of the things I actually have seen in other places that I'm not seeing here, and it may be happening, by the way, is even in Central Falls, for example, there was immediately an effort among the part of the superintendent and teachers to bring in other schools and sit in that school and say, what did you do differently? How can we learn from it? And there's really kind of this feeling of hands off. Oh my gosh, those are those 4 schools, and here's the rest of the system. And I think it's kind of incumbent upon, in that case, it was the leadership of the State Education Department who said, let's all go and see if we can figure out how we can transfer these lessons. And the people at the turnaround districts there were very welcoming about saying, yeah, this is the problem we had doing this, and now we're going to move forward. And then finally, I would just add, I looked at the leadership at the school and Byron and the principals, and I said, I don't understand why the school has such capacity and you're not using it to bring in more kids and students who could benefit from this program, whether it's to allow charters to come in the building or to grow charters or help somehow combine other schools that may not quite have reached rock bottom, but where maybe there's some interest in actually growing. We shouldn't be confining it and waiting for 4 years to see if it worked. If it looks like it's working and there's an interest, we need to be more dynamic about it. And so you've got a jewel. All eyes continue to be in Indiana. You've done some dramatic things here. Obviously, some of it's not all, as welcome as other things. But the reality is you're going faster and quicker, and I think in a much more researched, evidence-based way. Why not make a bigger deal of it?
I just want to say I'm a big fan of Center for Education Reform. I read everything you put out. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. You've been really great leadership, your organization.
Gene, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. You need to thank Jim Larson and his team. That's been phenomenal. You want to go to Marcus? Jim, is it okay? Is Marcus going to present to your answering?
We had structured it so that we would just open up for more questions as we did last time. I think this was just because they had an out-of-class guest, but I'm certainly open to that.
If anyone has questions, I know Evan's here. I know Marcus is here. Marcus, you want to come up? Todd, you want to come up real quickly? I mean, we just give the board a chance to ask questions.
Sure. You've just heard the last discussion. I guess do they have anything to add?
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree.
Do you want to?
No, I appreciate the perspective. It's always useful to get another perspective on the work that's being done. I think that the notion of getting accountability matched with authority is absolutely essential. We've been doing this a long time at Edison Learning. We've been in situations where it was out of balance, and that's where we didn't get the results. Either the client wasn't happy, or we didn't feel like we could be successful in delivering. And I think that that's one of the great hallmarks of this reform effort, and it's particularly gratifying to hear that from another party to see that's something that's working very well. I can say that. At Gary Roosevelt, things are continuing to make a lot of progress. We have tremendous traction and feel like the school is moving forward. Enrollment continues to grow every month, which we feel like is a terrific sign that we're making an impact on the community. We still have a long way to go. This is one of the things that we constantly remind the leadership team, the community about, and our team is that doing this kind of reform takes time. It's about re-educating students and community about what the expectations of school should be. Not just about how you behave in school, but about what you expect from school and what it means to be successful in school. And that's not something that over the course of just a few weeks or months you can completely ingrain. And so we are 5 or 10% of the way where we want to go, and we're thrilled that this is an effort that the board has invested in the long term, so that we can continue to see that progress over time.
Martini, Dan?
One of the things that we talk about a great deal at Arlington is the fact that the kids chose to be there, despite everything that they heard and were encouraged to select other places. These kids decided that this was their school and this is where they were taking a stand. And so the responsibility is great. We've been able to turn the culture remarkably. We had the president of the city council there yesterday, who had visited the year before, and we took her to see our charters, and she commented that the charters aren't nearly as impressive as the turnaround at Arlington, based on where Arlington was and where it is today. The struggle continues to be, we are there not just to create a culture, but to create high caliber learning opportunities for our students. And so we have an ongoing effort to train and retrain our teachers to be effective for the kids. That's been a hard process, given the struggle that we had in terms of getting access to student records and really being able to know how the kids were situated academically and scholastically, where they were in their walk toward a high school diploma. But I think I'd recognize the staff as being very organic and flexible in terms of their ability to respond. So we've had to, I guess I would say, flip Arlington a couple of times from an academic perspective, just to meet the needs of the kids who are actually there. And I think if you went and talked to the kids, they would tell you how much they appreciate the fact that folks are attending to them right where they are.
Questions? Todd, Marcus, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Common Core?
Common Core update. Amy?
Becky, are our slides in there? Our slides?
No.
Okay.
They have them, they got them as a PDF.
Perfect.
Great. So you all have packets that I think were sent to you yesterday electronically of some of the materials we were going to highlight today. The purpose of our discussion today is to bring you up to speed on what we've been doing with the Indiana Common Core standards. Today we have Dan Clark, who's going to talk a little bit about what the Indiana Education Roundtable has done in examining the issue and making the recommendation to the board back in 2010 to adopt the standards. We also have Carlotta Cooprider, who's here, who has helped really shape our way in terms of the implementation and making sure that we have all of our resources and materials captured in a way that's user-friendly so that teachers and educators can actually get to our materials, because we have plenty of them up on our website. But in this kind of rush for information about the Common Core standards, the problem is that they may not always be accessible. So how do we make sure that they're searchable, people can find them, and that's what we've done with our Indiana Common Core timeline, interactive timeline. So Dan, do you want to start with some of the work that the Indiana Education Roundtable did?
Well, thank you very much. I think there are two of us here that were present at the creation of academic standards in Indiana. I believe Mr. Shane and I were present in 1999 when a law was passed that required the state of Indiana to have academic standards that were nationally and internationally competitive. And that law has been in effect for 12 years now. Law also required that our standards undergo constant revision so that we always were striving to have nationally and internationally competitive standards. That law passed by huge bipartisan majorities. And the reason, the underpinning of that law was an understanding of where we stand in the world in terms of the quality of our workforce. And there is a chart in your material in which we've tried to illustrate, in relationship to all the other developed countries of the world, all the other states of this nation, what the educational attainment level of Indiana's workforce is. And Indiana's workforce is a bit above the average of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development countries, significant below countries like Japan and Korea. And there is an anomaly in the data in that countries that do their career and technical education programs differently are ranked very low in the data, like Germany and Poland, because we don't know how to count their outcomes. We don't know how to count apprenticeships. We don't know how to count occupational certificates and so on. If we were to do that, our competitive position, if we knew how to count those things, our competitive position would likely be lower. If that same chart were done by the age of our workforce, we would find two things. One, I'm very proud to be in the age cohort of our workforce that is among the better trained in the world, and you've got to be up there to do that. The fact of the matter is the youngest age cohort of our workforce, ages 25 to 34, is a little better educated than the workforce as a whole, but farther behind in the world. And those are the patterns that have led us to the policy for the past 10 years that our academic standards be nationally and internationally competitive. The best iteration of those standards at the moment is the Indiana Common Core. They were adopted in August of 2010 after many meetings in 2009 and 10 of the State Board and the Roundtable, extensive opportunities for input, broad state and national consensus that those were the best approximations of nationally and internationally competitive standards that we could have. There are two ongoing issues with those standards. There are legitimate questions about whether Indiana had better math standards than these standards, and there's also a legitimate question about what's the right kind of math. When the Senate Education Committee considered these issues a year ago, Dr. Bennett made it very clear that there was flexibility in the Indiana Common Standards to resolve issues like that. He noted that there was a limit on that flexibility and said that he would exceed the limit if it were necessary to make our standards the best that they could be. And I assume that offer still stands. Another issue that has become evident, this is the first time we have had standards that are supposed to be standards for college and career readiness. And that declaration of the intent of those standards has raised the issue of high school students receiving diplomas and then needing remediation when they go to college. Now, that's a complex issue, partly the fault of the assessments, partly the fault of the alignment, partly students getting diplomas that just aren't ready. And there are about 10,000 high school students in 2011 that got diplomas and then had to take remediation when they enrolled in post-secondary education. Dr. Bennett has, I think, approved a plan where we can begin to deal with that issue in a much more productive way for students. The plan that I think we are on a path to be able to begin to implement this spring is to allow the college placement test that is used to determine remediation to be given in the 11th grade, with an understanding then that the 12th grade, for that cohort of students who might be in jeopardy of needing remediation for post-secondary education, could receive supplemental instruction during the senior year. The department has a full-fledged partnership with Ivy Tech and Vincennes to administer the placement test, a full partnership with the placement contractor, placement test contractor, so that we can begin this spring to give that placement test in a timely way to help students their senior year to avoid the need for remediation. It is crystal clear that students who go into remediation almost never graduate from college. We don't really see this as more testing. It's a matter of taking the test they would take when they go to college, simply taking it 2 years sooner so we can do something more for them during their senior year.
Dean, how much is that 10,000 students costing the state, roughly?
Last
I heard was $60 million.
But that's Ivy Tech's numbers, they include all of the adults that come back.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay.
Whatever it is, the real cost is that those students are likely to be using their Pell Grants to pay for remedial classes that do not count for a degree. They end up in debt and they never get a degree. And the cost of that is, what's the opposite price? Incalculable. It's, whatever. I wasn't going to use priceless. It's incalculable. Yes. Yeah. So we are on a path to try and find a way to redress that issue in a much better way for students.
So let's take a moment, and my name is Carlotta Cooprider. I've had the privilege of working with the Division of Student Growth and Achievement the last few months around the implementation of the Common Core state standards. So let's take a few minutes. I did send you a visual. Looks like this in your packet. It's an interactive timeline. And my purpose here today is just to provide you a brief update on the implementation. So predominantly the document that I sent you is a snapshot of what we've been doing since the adoption in 2010 of the standards. And I would encourage you to visit our DOE website at the Common Core page and take a look at this document because it is interactive. So the beauty of the document is that teachers, educators, administrators can actually go to the document. The links are live. So depending on where they are in the implementation process, they can get materials quickly for them, again, based on what their individual needs are. Given the short amount of time, I'm just going to briefly highlight a couple of our foundational pieces of work. One I would like to point to is in the curriculum column, the literacy frameworks. Indiana's been leading the work with this. You've heard from Anna and John earlier today. The K through 6 frameworks, so when you look at those reading plans, they're all aligned to the Indiana Common Core. And then we took a step further and went to the secondary literacy framework. So you think about the new standards, and a big chunk of the new standards is literacy across disciplines. So reading is on all the agendas. So a big piece of that work to provide our response, Department of Ed's response to that, was to create these secondary literacy frameworks to provide tools for educators, for the education community to respond to that. So I encourage you to go look at that. That's a foundational piece of work. I would say another foundational piece of work is, again, at that website, just the mathematic toolboxes. There's a mathematics forum. So we talked a little bit about literacy and some of the shifts in literacy with the standards, but then also within mathematics, quite a few shifts there as well. So there's a forum there for our mathematics community to take a look at and actually receive online professional training, professional development, support, and guidance as they are implementing. Just a couple more pieces, I guess, that I would highlight, given the amount of time that we have, is I would say that if you're thinking about this work and you want to remember what we are doing, I'd say focus on two things. Our big goals have really been to support educators, to create instructional resources and materials that will support our educators. And that's what this document is. This is a list of most of the materials. That's where most of the focus of the work has been, on really creating those materials so districts, depending on where they are, can differentiate, individualize those materials based on what their needs are. The second piece I would say is our second biggest goal was to really increase capacity. So we think about our guest that we had in from Washington, D.C., and was talking about breaking down those walls and sharing. So I'd say think of it like this, a professional learning community, but outside of the school. So a professional learning community across the state of Indiana where they're sharing best practices and resources on implementation. So that's another big chunk of what our work has been through a regional educator engagement network, some educator leader cadre work. Most of these materials have all been shared out at conferences and workshops, professional associations, lots of webinars and communications such as that. And given the amount of time we have, I'm going to go ahead and stop and just take any questions that you do have.
I just want to say, if you could get Carlotta to come to your community and make a presentation on Common Core, it's easier to understand and explain to your constituency. Actually, if we could duplicate you and you could go and speak to all the corporations, that would be ideal.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of misconceptions that you clarify. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Dan, thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Carlotta.
Thank you.
And alternate accountability metrics.
Brian, I assume that's why you're here.
It is.
It's Brian Hassel. He's a good friend. So go ahead, Will. Lead us off.
Good afternoon again, folks. My name is Will Krebs. I'm the Director of Policy, Research, and Accountability, and I've been working with Brian and Claire Fittian-Green to put this together. I'll let Brian introduce himself.
I'm Brian Hassel, Co-Director of Public Impact and Education Research Organization based in North Carolina that works with the Charter Board.
What we're going to do today is go over the idea of an alternative accountability system for schools that serve students who are coming back and are either after having dropped out, receiving adult basic education. The first part of my presentation, I'm really going to frame the issue, provide just a general overview of the context and the need for this approach. The second part I'll spend a little bit more time on because that will outline our proposal, and then we'd love to hear feedback from you all about what this could look like, and then we'll move forward from there. Start with some statistics. Nationally, about 6.7 million folks drop out between the ages of 16 and 24. One of the important Indiana statistics that I'd like to point out, in 2010, 2011, and this isn't up there, there were about 4,400 students who dropped out. That was about 6.1% of the cohort. The good news is the 2007 rate was about 11.9, so we have consistently trended in the right direction on that percent of students who drop out. The bad news is that since 2007, around 35,000 Hoosier students have dropped out of high schools. That's roughly half of any given year's annual cohort. So over the last 5 years, we've lost half of a group of students who in a given year might have graduated. That's pretty staggering to think about. Fortunately, that decision to drop out, that does not always end a student's story. There are opportunities for those students to come back into the system and to earn that diploma. That's what we're talking about today, these alternative, these dropout recovery programs and these adult education programs that exist for students. We've got some in Indiana, but we know nationally that these opportunities need to be improved. Of those students who at some point drop out before they turn 18 and then re-enter the program, only about 20% of those students end up graduating and earning that diploma. So we're thankful that we have the opportunity, and some of the folks who operate these institutions are in the room and could probably shed some more light on what that looks like, but we do know that this is an indicator that we need to improve.
How does GED play in all that? Because that's the traditional right now.
So a GED per Indiana's law does not count as a traditional diploma.
Okay.
It is for some students probably the best route,
Right.
but it's not, I would say, as rigorous or present the same opportunities as the traditional diploma would. So if it were up to me, generally speaking, I would encourage these
Right.
students to pursue the diploma as opposed to the GED.
Well, haven't we had some discussions about potentially giving them a career opportunity in lieu of the GED? Because I volunteer at a center. I'm telling you, no one's graduated because they all show up at 4th grade, 6th grade reading. So it's sad. And then they have no hope because they're not employable. So.
That's a great point. We're going to talk some about the importance of that college and career readiness, and I think the suggestion in this proposal will hopefully be in line with what you're describing. So we know that these opportunities exist, but could be improved. When we look at overall national statistics, I mentioned about 20% of students who re-enter end up receiving that diploma. The remaining group, that 80%, around 45 end up re-dropping out or exiting after experiencing the program. They decide not to pursue till the end.
Is this the
Yes, I think so. Let's see.
Take your cover off the lens.
Okay, but now.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry.
This is the 46% exit prior, 37% remain in the program, and it's to be determined whether or not they complete or not. So now the next couple points I'm going to talk about are some of the challenges associated with measuring the performance of these schools. I'm going to start generally speaking and then apply it to the A through F framework as we know it. So first, these issues I'd like to point out now, and I will probably point out multiple times, largely are logistical, right? Largely have to do with how do you measure this. This isn't a question of, is there something other than graduation that we're shooting for? Is there something other than that college and career readiness we're shooting for? That's not the conversation. The conversation is mostly how do we ensure that what we're measuring and how we're aggregating those measures lead us to an understanding of the school that is accurate of its performance. Some of these challenges, I'd say the biggest has to do with calculating that cohort. So if you have a group of students who have exited high school, then re-enter a year after they exited, 10 years after they exited, how do you calculate that graduation rate, right? We top out at about the 6-year graduation rate. What do you do when you start thinking about a 10-year graduation rate? What do you do to collect these students into a cohort? So that's the first one. The second has to do with choosing those appropriate and measurable accountability indicators. For example, very similar reasons. How do you do those improvement metrics, right? If you have a hard time establishing the graduation cohort, how do you establish that 10th grade cohort, the 8th grade cohort, etc.? Next, setting high and achievable expectations. Again, not a question of lowering the expectations, but making sure that they remain high and are ones that can be accomplished. And then finally, if you do all those things incorrectly, it's very challenging to differentiate the performance of these schools, right? If you have a floor effect or a ceiling effect, you're not going to be able to measure improvement. You're not going to be able to differentiate between those high-performing schools, which means you can't identify best practice and say, here's what's working, here's what's not, and you can't identify the schools when it's time to intervene. Next, moving on to some of the specific challenges associated with the state's accountability model, A through F. So a quick reminder of the factors that go into our A through F model for high schools. You all are very familiar. The graduation rate, the proficiency rate based on 10th grade cohort who passed the ECA. We have an improvement measurement, which looks at proficiency increases between 8th grade and 10th grade to graduation. And we have that college and career readiness indicator. Now, as you might suspect, based on what I've already mentioned, the graduation rate calculation, because it's difficult to identify that cohort, is very tricky to include as we do it now. Additionally, the proficiency rate is hard to understand. The cohort placement, who are your 10th graders? You also have issues with the scope and sequence in a dropout recovery program that might intervene with either A, the content that the student receives and when the student receives that content, because they might be moving at a quicker pace, but also simply when the tests are offered. There are 3 test windows a year. If a student moves multiple years of content within 1 year, when is that assessment given, what assessments are given, when is the reassessment given, etc. Next, that improvement. Again, I mentioned that it's very difficult to understand the baselines, therefore it's difficult to understand improvement. Is the 8th to 10th calculation for a student who had 6 years between 8th grade and 10th grade the same measure as for a student who truly had 2 years between 8th and 10th grade? And then finally, the college and career readiness. That this is one that actually works pretty well, and so we'll get to that. So that's by and large the landscape. There's this need. There are a group of students who are taking advantage of the need. We can raise the level of expectations for those providing the service, but our current accountability system isn't adequately set up to measure those increases. Oh, did I miss them?
I think you're clicking the wrong button.
Am I?
Yeah.
But you were going
Nobody
really
wanted
well.
to tell me?
We weren't going to interrupt you.
I was cruising. There we go. All right. Back on track. So to begin this work, we wanted to really ground it in an example of how this is done well, but also a system that has high expectations for itself. So we worked a lot with the Goodwill Excel Center to understand what their program looks like and where it might want to be. Here are some basic statistics about what they look like, who they serve. I think it's very telling. the average age of students, the range is 16 to 65. So when you start thinking about those individuals who are returning, who, while they were in Indiana high schools, we did not have a cohort system. We did not have STNs. We did not have those student identifying numbers. So clearly there are some just logistical issues.
Some of those issues could be, I know.
Private schools do service time there, so that could explain the 16. So it'd be good to extrapolate those numbers out.
Absolutely. You also see the persistence rate differs for Excel Center than compared with overall. They have about a 50% rate as opposed to an 18% rate, so a higher level of performance. So when we started thinking about the priorities, we started with this. Then we looked at our current A to F system, right, to make sure that we weren't deviating from the accountability system that has really been vetted and that is the guiding principle at this point. So first and foremost, setting high and achievable expectations. Dr. Bennett's philosophy, one with which I agree, one of the state's role is to set those expectations and hold folks accountable for performance.
Well, could you back up a screen
sure.
before you go to the next one? All graduates receiving a waiver are required to earn an industry certification.
Yes.
Is that something we're making available to them through this program, or they have to sort of seek that out on their own?
The opportunity to receive the industry certification,
yeah.
Their access to industry certification would be similar to what all other schools have in terms of being able to pursue those.
Is that word one?
Sorry?
Is that like
Word one?
It's however they coordinate that with either some type of local career and tech ed center, Ivy Tech, or how Vincennes. It's whatever kind of connection they make as a school.
So each individual school is putting something in place.
Not necessarily. So every
Or
school across
at least
the
contracting
state-
with somebody.
That's Goodwill's model.
Yeah,
yes,
that's Excel
That's not the
Center's
state's model.
Right. So in order to receive a diploma via a waiver in the state, you do not need to receive this currently. But any school could say
But
this
Excel
is our policy.
requires it.
Yeah.
Kind
It's
of
a
to your
higher bar.
earlier point about their policy.
How long has this capability been available, Will?
That's a good question to receive the industry certifications. I am not sure.
Really, I mean, you guys probably led this effort in terms of doing something different with, not if you will, waiver diplomas or general diplomas or some type of diploma other than the regular or normal diploma. So this is probably, Jim, specific to Excel, and as long as Excel's been doing it, they're probably the first example in the state that we've had doing it.
And that's fine. They're the first example in the state of doing what they're doing. God bless them.
Yeah, exactly.
Could you please get me a printout of the certifications that
sure.
have been granted since the inception of that program, please?
Sure, and we make that available to schools. We include industry certifications in the A-to-F calculation now, and so we have a list of approved certifications. And gosh, I want to say there are over 60 on that list, but I can surely get that to y'all.
And I'd like to ask you to get me one other document.
Sure.
It's the documentation that lets students know what certifications in that landscape is available to them for them to
Absolutely,
pursue.
sure.
It'd be nice, yeah, if they know high need and the wages associated with it. Might create goals and motivation, and we know that affects
Yeah,
completion.
there's a huge opportunity in front of us given the awesome numbers of dropout people that we have out there in our society right now.
I agree.
Just look what happened to Excel once they finally
Figured it out.
got up the courage to launch that.
And we have, I think we've done a really thorough job with career pathways. We have some, course sequences that we make available to schools that result and conclude with that industry certification. And I will absolutely provide you all with that information.
Okay.
And if any of it looks thin, let me know, and we'll.
Thank you.
So do you have good information on high need and the wage associated with it?
High need in terms of the
What's going on in the
careers
state?
that-
Yeah,
Yeah, DWD.
I
has
just
all
wondered
that.
how closely
Yeah.
we.
And we're working right now. The state of Indiana, I think y'all know, received a SLEDS grant, the Student Longitudinal Data Systems, and one of the partners with that is DWD. And the goal is to allow DWD, CHE, and DOE to have more of a thorough collaboration.
How far along is that work?
Nascent. We received the grant less than a year ago, and primary work is around identifying the kinds of objectives.
How long will it take to get from nascent to mature and effective?
That's
we don't have much time.
Yeah.
I've heard the governor-elect talk a good bit about this as well. And
yes.
Jim would have some ideas about that.
It's a function of how serious we are about it, which we have been totally unserious about up until the last year or so.
What is our serious role? What is our role in helping to get more serious and accelerating as a board? Would you say?
Mostly funding.
Well, I think the first step that frequently goes unnoticed is the fact that it is now in our state's accountability system.
Yeah.
That we put now an emphasis on providing and providing students options for high-wage, high-skilled jobs, and the school also gets credit for that. We've never done that before. So Dan, that's a pretty big leap forward. The second piece of that, and Will talked about this, was as a body, we have to decide what the certifications are that are truly rigorous enough so that a kid, this just doesn't become a certification mill, if you will. That we're just not sending kids through getting some meaningless certification. The school gets credit, the kids get credit, and it's really nothing but a mailing deal. So this has been a coordinated effort. I think that's why, and again, I really credit this board with being thoughtful about this. This is exactly why we put those 5% escalators in the accountability system, was so we could make sure there were quality controls in place so that the certifications we were offering were meaningful to economic development.
We'll just have, with our new superintendent coming in, we're going to have to put on our agenda on some regular basis then the priority and the push and know where it's going, because this is a great opportunity for
it's a huge and
a
enormous
lot of
opportunity.
individuals that are now kind of in the not so good place, huh?
Mm-hmm. Which really goes, if you don't mind, Will, which really goes to why this discussion is so important about these alternative measurement for our alternate schools, our alternative schools, because they are so different in their delivery, they're so different in their student populations, that we have to start thinking about these exact things in terms of their accountability measurements. Because the truth is, you can't look at the Excel Center like you can look at a comprehensive high school. You cannot and expect it, and even have an apples-to-apples comparison. I mean, just the fact that I don't think we have a high school in the state that has 16 to 65. I might be going out on a limb, but I think I'm close on that. So if that is in...
You only have a meeting last week, trash.
Yeah. So that's why I think this is such an important discussion, because, the public outcry about these schools has been, well, they're failing. These schools are failing by our A through F. Well, I'm sorry, this is a very different delivery.
Right. Absolutely.
We need to get them out of the F.
Well, I'm frankly for an A through F rubric. I am not for, I think we have to have a set of measurements that are consistent with what these schools do.
So the criteria to get an A is different.
Tony, you've always said that the A through F is flexible, but we are required to align it with growth model because that's what the Department of Ed waiver said. So
Sure.
There's just a lot of misunderstanding around
But this goes out, I think, given the fact, Joe, that the first, and I'm going to be just kind of obvious with this, given the fact that the most striking thing about these schools are the vast, vast majority of their kids have already been eliminated from the graduation cohort. It first and foremost kind of takes you out of that comprehensive school, set of metrics. So while I agree with that, I don't think anyone in the U.S. Department of Education sees these schools that are really addressing the needs of students who have exited high school and really had destined themselves for a dead end. I don't think the U.S. Department of Education has a problem, and I don't want to speak for Secretary Duncan and the department, but I don't think they have a big problem with us holding them accountable but holding them accountable for what they do. Well,
Show some growth. Some
exactly. However we define that growth, or however we define those achievement levels for these schools.
Yeah, that's a great conversation, and as you see, one of the priorities here is emphasizing that college and career readiness, because we know that for these schools that is the priority to prepare these students for the next step. Finally, I'll mention another priority we wanted to be sure was on our radar is making sure that we didn't create any loopholes or any opportunities for anyone to dodge accountability or lower the expectation, create diploma mills, et cetera. And so we'll talk about some of those. So now we'll jump into what this might look like. First, the question is, which schools would be eligible to be measured on this alternative accountability system? So first, you'll note that we're talking about school corporations in this regard. So if you jump to the third slide here, so corporations writ large would be measured under this alternative model as opposed to individual schools. The reason here is that one, public charter schools are considered corporations, so that charter school that is explicitly stated that their mission is to serve this population would be eligible for consideration, but also because traditional public corporations have the ability to charter a school, that if a community without a charter school that serves this population had the desire to create it, it would be within the power to do so. And by creating that separate entity, there are some built-in preventions to those unanticipated consequence I mentioned, but also it then creates the environment in which the school is explicitly saying we are designing ourselves to serve this population, which I think is very important.
That's the parent trigger. It hasn't happened yet, right?
They could result from
Okay.
from that
But
kind
I
of
mean,
movement.
no one's really taken advantage of that. At the moment-
No,
at the
local,
moment.
not, we haven't seen that.
Yeah.
So once a corporation is interested in this approach, the next one to jump back up, at least 60% of the students who are enrolled must either A, belong to a cohort that has already exited high school, so those students who dropped out and didn't re-enter until after their cohort has already left, or who are over the age of 18 at a certain date when they are enrolled. Basically the same criteria, but making sure we catch those right students who are returning. The school must serve a combination of grades 9, 10, 11, or 12. It couldn't be set up to have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders within the school. And also, the corporation must receive approval from the State Board of Education to receive this. So it's not an automatic thing despite those quantified criteria. It would be one where the authorizer of the charter school would come before you all and need to get that approval. This would not completely replace the letter grade assigned by the traditional model. Both would remain. So you would have those comparison points, and one would anchor the other.
And corporations that decide to reorganize, wash that and start from scratch.
There are requirements for that. If you remember, Joe, it's a great question, and I'm going to take you back. Do you remember the discussion we had about the two corporations? I want to say it was
They were consolidated.
New Harmony and was it North Posey?
Okay.
Is that right? Do you, Posey County. If you remember, Joe, we actually went through a process of considering how we calculated their letter grade because of the percentage of students that were new. Okay. So there are some calculations for the board to consider.
So it's not a scratch.
No.
Clean slate.
Yeah.
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 A couple features built in to prevent those loopholes and unintended consequences. First, I mentioned the eligibility requirement. Even though that says 60% must be in this population, regardless of the actual percentage, 100% of students who are enrolled are included in the calculation. So it's not just a measure of students who came in out of cohort. It's a measure of all students. Secondly, these schools, when you think about how these will be set up, this isn't similar to the idea that a principal could assign a student from one classroom to another in order to game some system. The student would have to choose to go to this school and enroll in it. A principal or superintendent couldn't say, we're not going to take you. You have to go to this school. It needs to be some mutual agreement. So students couldn't be shuffled around in this case to avoid that accountability bullet. And then finally, there are simple practical and logistical obstacles to doing this. That ratio requirement, we've had conversations, in order to qualify, it might be kind of tricky to find the number of students who are interested in participating who are out of cohort. And it also would take some effort for a school corporation to charter a school, create the systems, put it together, simply to use it as a dumping ground, if you will. And then also we know the benefit of having multiple count dates so that a disincentive to unenroll students if these become associated with funding. So now the actual suggested metrics of the alternative framework based on three things: graduation rate, college and career readiness, and proficiency rate. You'll notice that the improvement factor from the traditional A through F model is not mentioned. We'll talk a little bit about that. By and large, the metrics are the same, right? The difference is how they're defined and how we will measure them. Again, the idea, this is not a conversation of adjusting expectations for this population. It's an adjustment of how we measure the performance of the schools serving them. I think that's very important. The model itself works basically the same as the A through F model in terms of assigning points for certain categories, aggregating those points, and translating them to a letter grade. You're all very familiar with that. So the first metric, the graduation rate, let's jump into this because this is perhaps the most complicated because it's probably the most complex problem that needs to be solved. So in order to determine a school's graduation rate that's participating in this alternative model, first you would just look at those students who are in an active cohort. So in theory, those 40% of students who are not returning to the system, and you would do that just like you would normally do. You would look at when they were assigned to the cohort and their expected graduation year. The next step, those students who are returning to the system, those adult educators or those who belong to a cohort that is no longer active, would be reassigned to a cohort, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But they would be set to say, regardless of your age, we're going to consider you in our eyes a junior, and your expected graduation rate is you have your junior year and your senior year, and then it's expected that you graduate. So if Brian and I were in the school, and I'm your traditional 17-year-old junior, and he's a 27-year-old who is returning to the program and is identified to be at junior level performance, he and I would be in the same graduation cohort for that school. So that's how the rate would be calculated. In order to reassign, I think this is one of the neatest parts of the model. And again, I think this is Goodwill's approach to putting this together. Is that correct? Yeah. So I think this is really, really well done. So basically what would happen, a student enters the school and enrolls. The school then goes through this process. They assign the student basically 4 points and say, all right, you're going to start with a value of 4. And then they ask these 4 questions. Or these three questions. Has the student failed or not taken the ECA or GQE? If the student has failed, you take away 1 point. Next question. If the student enrolled before January, needing more than 10 credits, or after January, needing more than 5 credits, you take away another point. And then finally, they provide the TABE assessment. I'm not an expert on that, so I can't answer too many questions, but it's a placement exam, essentially, and identifies grade level performance. If the student performs below the 7th grade, you subtract another point. Depending on how many points the student has at the end of this process, you assign them to a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior year cohort. I think that's really thorough and really well done. And so then based on that, we would go back to the idea that if I'm a junior, I have my junior year and my senior year to graduate regardless of my age. Students could not be reassigned, right? So if I enroll and then drop out and then come back in and enroll, we wouldn't go through this process again. You can only assign students to grade 9 through 12, so I couldn't put a 27-year-old as a 6th grader and give myself all those years to have the student graduate. I also couldn't put a student as a 13th grader and say that he's a 5th-year graduate. Authorizers will play a role in this. They will verify that cohorts are being set this way. Authorizers will also audit student exit and mobility rates. This is an important feature. Currently, if you think about the grad rate determination, if a student moves to homeschool, the student is not included in the school's graduation rate determination. there's no reason for an adult student to unenroll and go to homeschool. So if that were to happen, it wouldn't be such that, okay, the student isn't included in your rate calculation. So the authorizers will audit those codes and adjust the rate if necessary.
Will, to Joe's earlier point, if a 27-year-old shows up with a fourth grade reading ability, do they just not get to participate in this? Or
they can participate, but their cohort, they'd be in the ninth grade cohort.
They have to start as a ninth grade. In other words, you can't go any lower than a ninth grade.
Yep.
But if you read on a fourth grade level, how are you going to?
The school's got some work to do. Frankly, the school has a lot.
There's probably a question as to how you guys handle that, Scott.
Yeah, a large percentage of students come in below the ninth grade level. They've been out of school for a while. So we have a large remediation program they get put in both in math and English to get them up to speed to the point that now they can access the high school content. And it takes a while. That's why this is so important, is give us that flexibility with them.
So they may be just working on reading before they start any other coursework. Okay.
Thanks.
So that's how the rate is calculated. Again, the idea that we assign points based on rates. Similar to A through F, the difference is that for the 4-point, currently A through F is 90 to a 100. This alternative model has 75 to 100. This is still, I want to emphasize, this is still a very high bar for these students based on what we've observed. You see the bottom bullet point here. Overall, the graduation rate for this group of students returning is around 18%. So that's around your average. I'm not sure how your guys' rate has.
Yeah, we haven't done it based on this cohort. Look, I will tell you, 75 is really high because the issue with this population is retention. They've dropped out of school once or twice, and they will tend to do that again. Our retention rate is started off in the 50s. We worked pretty hard to get that up into the 60% rate, but that's retention. That's not graduation, right? So then it's how many of those people you graduate. So I will tell you, and Will is probably soft-sold a little bit. I mean, that is really high. That 75%. That's anybody gets that's knocking it way out of the park. But I think that getting up into that in the middle range of that is a pretty good stretch goal.
So that's the range. These schools also, just like in the traditional model, have the opportunity to receive a bonus point if they have enough students who do not graduate in 4 years receive that diploma after 5. The next step is the college and career readiness. Again, one of the priorities was to really emphasize this. This is calculated the exact same way in this alternative model as it is with the standard A through F model. The difference is that the targets here are twice as high as the targets in the traditional A through F model. So in order to receive the 4 points, currently in the traditional model, it's 25% or more. In this approach, it's 50% or more. Based very much on the conversation that we all had, the objective here, the priority is to make sure that these students exit ready for the next step. And so demanding that those graduates, a very high percentage, accomplish that, I think that's an important consideration in how these weights come together.
The assumption is that every way toward career readiness.
Yes, but not exclusive. We didn't.
You can go either way.
Yes, right. The next, proficiency remains in the calculation. This is important despite the problems with identifying the cohort. These students still are assessed on the ECA. And it's still a graduation qualifying exam that students need to pass the ECA. And if not, they can receive a diploma, but it's via the waiver process. The other difference here is in the traditional model, we look at the proficiency rate of the 10th grade cohort. Through this approach, because it's difficult to identify that cohort, we count it per graduate. We are going to look at, through the course of studying this a little bit more thoroughly and piloting it, an opportunity to receive a bonus here, just like we've done in the traditional model, the 8th to 10th improvement, the 10th to 12th, that some creative thinking around how to identify a cohort, how to look at improvement over a length of time. We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but we've got some ideas around how many days they're enrolled and how frequent, when they're assessed, and improvement opportunities there. Finally, just like with the traditional model, all these points come together. You see that graduation rate is the highest weighted. Second is college and career readiness, and then those proficiency rates are both anchored at 15% for the overall scoring. After that calculation is completed, and again, this is a very, very rigorous approach, a 1-point penalty will be applied to a school's score if fewer than 80% of students who fail the ECA after 2 attempts receive a waiver diploma without also receiving that industry certification. Again, emphasizing the industry certification, emphasizing the quality of the diploma, preventing these from becoming diploma mills that just give waiver diplomas without students passing the ECA. Very high bar. The suggestion also includes, just like we've done with college and career readiness, to increase that 80% over time on a sliding scale, so the expectation increases every year. The final grade calculation is the same. The points translate to that grade.
So, Brian, can I ask you something? You guys have worked on this kind of stuff all over the country, right? What else have you seen for these types of schools? Is anybody else trying to crack this code?
Well, a lot of states have tried to tackle this, and I think what's different here is what a lot of states have done is said, well, all we can really do is compare the alternative schools to each other and see, put them on a curve and like the good ones and not like the ones at the bottom of the curve. And then they've delinked it from this idea that we have to set a bar of high expectations and then ask whether schools are getting over that bar. And so I think what we're trying to do here that's really different is say, these schools, in some ways more than any schools, need high standards because we've already failed these students once or twice. Let's make sure we have a high bar for the schools so that the kids are really expected to do something, not just put them on a curve with the other schools for alternative kids.
So you like what this looks like from a national context?
I think it'll make you have the strongest set of accountability measures for this kind of school anywhere.
Yeah, I'm comforted by that theoretically, but and I agree with it almost 100%, but the pass rate of 90 to 100 combined with a grad rate of 75 to 100 feels doubly strenuous, given that a lot of these kids, to Tony's point, are going to come in with a 1, so they're going to be 9th graders, and the school's going to be having to scramble just to get them A, to learning capability, and then B, through. I don't know whether you can, because I want to be careful how I say this, but I think you could have some certifications where the kids could pass the certification easily, but not necessarily pass the ECA quite as easily. And once you put the diploma requirement in there, I think you could be accused of double counting on the negative side. You just might think about that a little bit. I don't know. If this is just for discussion.
We can certainly take it.
What will really become problematic is most of these kids in Indiana are in rural Indiana. And, you can't put together in numbers a solid class to pursue any one particular vocation, content, course content. It's just, it is what it has been. The only thing that alternative schools in Indiana have basically done for years and years is the GED. And in today's world, the GED is not a high-value certification. Doesn't help them do much of anything, to be honest. So, where we're headed is the right way to do, but it's a very complicated thing to get there. Scott obviously has learned a whole lot more than anybody else in this world. That will be a good model for everybody who tries to follow. But it's not an easy task, and it just requires a lot of flexibility in a lot of areas, and a lot in training equipment and things in critical locations. It's going to require some investment that our state has not been willing to make in years past.
Well, and Lord knows I've been accused of being a corporate pig far too many times. But, if I were looking at this
back in my former life as a CTE director, our career and tech ed centers would be ideal spots to charter or to develop these types of schools, because you already have the certification piece, the delivery of the certification built in. So, if I were running a school district and I wanted to find a revenue stream, my revenue stream sits right with my career and tech ed center, because I could utilize my career and tech ed center for multiple purposes to serve my general student population and as a recovery center. So, this has a huge possibility, Jim, in terms of scaling, in my opinion. I think this accountability system and the focus, the way this accountability system has focused delivery, opens up a huge opportunity for our career and tech ed centers, I believe.
Yeah, I don't remember what year it was, but with the chamber, we have recognized this, and I've beaten on them for so long that we finally got the Joyce Foundation to fund a major research piece that the consulting group out in Kansas City did. And they did a beautiful report that told us that we had, I think, 931,000 people in the state of Indiana in the critical age group that were semi-literate by definition. And we only have 6 million people in the state, so look what a huge amount, what a waste that is. And we just continue. We're realistically dropping out 30% of our kids every year for whatever reason, homeschool, whatever, because 90% of them will disappear once they go to whatever alternative mechanism that they leave the school for. So it's an enormous opportunity. It really, really is.
We think so. And the next steps to make sure we capitalize on the opportunity is to have the conversation we're currently having, hear from you all in terms of other input you might have in terms of how we approach this. And then from there, we will engage in some more analysis and participation with our partners. We've had great partners through all of this. Excuse me. So gain approval from you all in terms of this is the right approach. If there are other ideas that you want us to look at, other avenues we should explore, and then initiate with our partners a pilot and analysis so that we can, potentially do some impact analysis of what does the participation or proficiency rate look like when you look at some different cohort models, what the Goodwill Center hasn't measured their graduation rate with this revised rate calculation. So allow us to view into that. In January, we can present some rules to you all to implement the rulemaking process that will establish this system, and then modify the approach if needed based on what we learn, based on public comment, etc.
Will it would be really helpful to get some picture of what DWD has been doing, or what's their summary of involvement?
They've come a long way in the last 1 to 2 years.
Okay.
In becoming involved in doing the things that they should have been doing for a long time.
I don't see that involvement in my region. It's very